Hello and welcome to our April 11th, 2023 Planning Commission. We welcome everybody. We'll start with our roll call.
All right, Stiles.
Present.
Green.
Here.
Zaremski.
Here.
Osterholm.
Here.
Brown.
Here.
Also present is Planning and Zoning Administrator Denise Swinger and Village Solicitor Amy Blankenship.
Okay, then we will start with reviewing our agenda, and hopefully everybody, well, the agenda, any changes to it, any additions? If not, then we'll review the minutes, and we did have updated minutes, if everybody has had a chance to look at it, because we were missing a couple pages. So I'm just going to say, does anyone have any changes? Did you look at them and any changes to make? If not, could we get a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve.
A second?
I'll second.
Great.
Oh, is that Gary?
No, it's raised, Gary.
Seconding?
So it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay. Then we're going to go on to communications. And we had two that were attached, something from Matthew Kirk, and then also something from Laura Curliss. Any other communications, Judy?
That's all I had.
Okay. Council and committee reports.
Okay. So I have, let's see. So council finalized the joining of SOPEC as an entity to provide gas aggregation services for the village. This action should lower gas utility customers' bills. Those under contract with another entity, as opposed to simply being a customer of CenterPoint, will not be opted in automatically, nor those on level billing. All others will be opted in and can opt out at any time. So we're recommending that if you want to get on board, you check with whoever your provider is to make sure there isn't any cost associated with leaving them. Council will hear PC's recommendations regarding annexed land and residential districts at their meeting on the 17th. Well, at our meeting on the 17th. And Home Inc. also requested a delay to the recommendation from PC regarding the preliminary plan for the PUD will be heard on May 1st and the 15th instead.
Great. Anything else anyone has with that you know? Okay. Then we will go on to, and it doesn't look like we have many citizens here, but are there any citizens' comments of anything that is not going to have a public hearing? Okay, then we will move on to our public hearing, our first one.
Okay, so the first one is amending Chapter 1250 Business Districts, changing from a conditional to a permitted use dwelling units on the upper floors of buildings with non-residential uses at street level in B1 Central Business District, as well as the B2 General Business District. I want to go ahead and just mention the Chapter 1252 industrial districts because I had it typed there as allowing as a permitted use, but that was not what we had decided at the last meeting. So I did correct that on the table. I must have not corrected it for Judy's agenda. Because so I just wanted to let you know that that's going to be different. But right now we're just looking at the 1250 business districts. And that was what Planning Commission, what you were thinking, that's what the zoning group was interested in seeing, and staff has no issue with that if Planning Commission doesn't.
Any discussion from Planning Commission members? I know recently that we've had, in the last few years, we've had several requests, and we always have approved them, that they seemed like they were pretty smoothly.
Yeah, those were in the B1. But I mean, so because B1 really and B2, you don't have the issues with that you would from an industrial. So I don't see an issue with it being permitted.
Any more questions for Denise? Okay, then we will open the public hearing. And if there's anybody who wants to speak, feel free to.
This is just regarding the business district.
Would you
Yes.
mind, yeah,
Yes.
okay. Okay, then if we don't have anything, we'll close the public hearing. And I will move approval of amending Chapter 1250, Business District, to change from conditional to permitted use for dwelling units on the upper floors of the building.
I'll second that.
Okay.
All right. Green.
Yes.
Zaremski.
Yes.
Osterholm.
Yes.
Brown.
Yes.
Stiles.
Yes.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Then the next one is amending Chapter 1252, Industrial Districts.
Yes, and so that is allowing residential on, with not, if you have non-residential on the ground floor, you could have residential in the upper floors in Industrial 1 and Industrial 2. We only have one location in Yellow Springs, that's Industrial 2, and that's YSI's property. The other I-1 areas is just over here on Cliff Street right now. Millworks has an underlying PUD zoning with I-1, and then where 888 Dayton Street is, and Naveca Place
Late.
and where the book place used to be, yeah, that's I-1 as well, in addition to across the street where Vernay is, and then the Rain Brothers building is I-1. So this would be a conditional use, but it would be an allowed use for residential. And that would be completed, I've added that into the I-1 and I-2 code. It wasn't there before. There wasn't any residential before.
Okay, any discussion? Okay, if no discussion, then we will open the public hearing. Anybody want to speak? If so, come forward and tell us your name.
Hi, I'm John Hempfling. I live in the village. This text amendment does diverge slightly from what we'd recommended in that it restricts the residential use to the upper floors. We had been suggesting a new sort of residential use that would basically be similar to the one on the upper floors. It's just that you could have it anywhere in the building as long as the building wasn't purely residential. And I wasn't sure if, my understanding, and to be clear, this wasn't our original idea. This was proposed to us by the previous solicitor, Brianne Parcels, and I don't recall hearing here or from her or otherwise any argument for restricting that to the upper floors. I would say that the reason to restrict it to the upper floors in the business district is that foot traffic is so important and for the survival of those businesses, and obviously by clustering a lot of retail businesses on the ground floor, you're going to attract more foot traffic, whereas I don't see that same idea making as much sense in the industrial district. Even if you were to find that you did want to restrict it to the upper floors, I would still urge you to repeal 1262.08 E4, which is some specific requirements. Sorry, this was, I don't know if this is in your packet, but it was in our recommendations that this section be repealed. It restricts dwelling units on upper floors, non-residential at street level, with these restrictions that non-residential uses, including storage, shall not be located on the same floor as a dwelling unit. So basically, if you had a residence above an industrial use, you wouldn't be able to have any other industrial business uses on the same floor as that residence. And I think that this cuts exactly against Brianne's intention, which was to give businesses and industrial uses preferential treatment. This is part of the reason why we agree that this should only be conditional, because we don't really want to encourage residences in the industrial district. We want to see business and industrial uses. I guess I felt like this restriction could have the unfortunate effect, if you did have a residence, of then restricting the upper floor to only residences. The other restriction I feel like is completely redundant, which is that dwelling units shall not be located on the street level of a mixed-use building. That feels entirely redundant to the fact that the dwelling units are on upper floors. It's non-residential at street level. Anyway, that's all. It doesn't really matter that much, but as long as we're changing it, and it's probably never going to get changed forever, might as well get it right?
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Okay, then we will close the public hearing. Discussion, anyone?
Is there a history why we said residential on the second floor?
Well, there wasn't any allowance of it at all in industrial. And so I think probably when they were thinking about the downtown area, I don't even think it was even allowed in B2. It was simply allowed in the downtown area, I think. And so that was probably just because everything would have been on the second floor.
Okay. So just following that as sort of a model, we said that then in the industrial areas, it would be on the second floor too.
Yeah.
Like
What we'd
like a lot
said.
of those buildings don't have second floors.
And I know that when Millworks at one point was talking about the PUD, they were looking at, the previous owners were looking at artist studios on the ground floor and then the living quarters above on that property. So I don't know what Planning Commission wants to do. I don't really have any recommendation one way or the other on this. I just followed what we had before.
So right now, as it stands, we don't have any industrial buildings that really technically have second floors, right? I mean, there's some,
Yeah, there's over at, you would at Mavecca, there
Right.
is some second levels over there. I don't.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's Miami Valley, what is it, educational, what is it?
Yeah.
So that wouldn't, so that's,
There's a bunch of things. The school board is in there now.
Right.
Yeah, he said, but I mean, it would give him
accounting.
another option if he wanted to do that. I know he talked to me about it one time, asked me
Okay.
if somebody could live there.
so with Millworks,
That would be more than likely something that they would build.
right.
Yeah.
And so it could only be on the second floor because it seems, is it like a safety thing because it's an industrial, what are, initially, I think that when we're thinking about industrial stuff, we're thinking about dangerous chemicals, we're thinking about heavy industry, we're thinking about things that could be detrimental for somebody living on a ground floor. But, you know what I mean? I just feel like, why just the upper floors? Just because that's what's already there?
That's what we had before in
Okay.
B1, B2, and that's what I went ahead and duplicated in I1
Okay.
and I2. I didn't think about just having single-family dwelling units or
Yeah.
apartments.
This is just me talking at
Yeah,
this
no,
point
no,
because
me
it's not
too.
like a
I
thing.
know.
Well,
it's fine.
it makes a lot of sense. As you say it, I'm thinking about things like loading docks and deliveries and certain sorts of access and security measures that would occur
On the
for
ground.
an industry that would be very different for a residential area,
Sure.
making so that it would make sense to separate them. And it makes more sense that industry be on the first floor.
Right.
But, I mean,
Yeah.
that was my only thought when you were talking about, what's the difference? They have pretty different needs.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing I wonder is if we're talking about the reason that we're restricting residential and business area because of the foot traffic.
That makes
Well, I know
sense.
we also don't have a lot of industrial area in
No.
Yellow Springs. And if that is something that we want to promote, because that is how the town gets revenue, I'm not sure if we want to then, increase residential there. It seems like on the second floor would be better and leave the ground floor for industrial.
Right. Unless you have ambulatory issues. Yeah.
The other issue with industry is often there's a pretty high bar for fire code
Sure.
between, for the walls in between
Absolutely.
industrial use
Yeah.
and the floors and all the stuff, so.
Okay.
It's an interesting question. I actually was thinking, I thought at Mill's work, there are some second floor spaces,
At Millworks, there might be,
Millworks.
yeah, there
Yeah,
might be.
I think so.
I'm not sure.
because there were
I know they have hangar types that don't
Yeah.
really have a second.
But then, not just the hangar type, but there's some office area that I thought had a second
Oh,
floor.
and like in Tuckin Reds, there's an upstairs.
And that, it would be easy,
That's
yeah.
when there's
And even then,
nonstop.
the high bay that they have, it'd be easy to put in a second floor.
Yeah.
But the other thing I was thinking in terms of, also there in Millworks, is the recent, I saw recently, because it wasn't there forever, there's like a little cottage of sorts was built there, and there's someone has like an office and,
The house that Elmink is in.
no.
It's
There's
a little, it's like a little prefab shed, and they're
It's-
doing counseling services.
Yeah, it's like counseling
It
and
came
whatever.
before, yeah.
And in reality, it looks like a little cottage, and you could, if you really wanted to, you could put in a line of little cottages in an industrial space like that if you really wanted to. But that's a good point, though, that you raise in terms of, for as limited as industrial space is, we not that there's going to be a flood of residential development necessarily, but you want to focus on industrial space.
We've lost businesses in town
Yeah.
because they did not have space.
Yeah, right. And if all of a sudden, like Mavecca would decide that this whole area, they have, like a large, I don't know how it's broken up now, that they want to just put in half a dozen apartments in this space instead of other business uses, that might not be so great in the big picture. Yeah.
I'm just kind of curious. On the industrial, I'm just thinking about kind of a devil advocate thing here, but if someone's kid, Lord forbid, they're out there, they live there, they come out, they get hit by a beer delivery truck or something, what kind of liability are we looking at? I mean, are we absolved, or are we putting ourselves in jeopardy by doing this?
We the village?
Yes. No, we'd be fine.
Private property.
Making sure. Lawyers are funny. I think that this is just, I don't have an issue with, if we're going to have it as a conditional to have dwelling units anywhere in industrial, we're going to let them on the second floor. I'd say let people have as much flexibility as possible, because, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of industry trying to get into town. We have that whole place outside of town where the marijuana grower is, and there's 2 more lots that nobody's wanted there. So, I'd say if somebody wants to build cottages or, make an apartment or something like that, I'd be fine with, just taking off the second floor. Dwelling units, in buildings with non-residential uses.
Yeah, that's fine with me. Just for the I-1 and I-2,
Yeah.
and leave B1 and B2 as it is.
Yeah, B1 and B2, that makes sense because of the street traffic. But for I1 and I2, where there aren't necessarily 2-story buildings and there's a lot more variety there, I think it would be fine.
Well, I'm still following, Susan's suggestion that, what's also happening near term, there's a lot of activity between the village administration to some degree and the Yellow Springs Development Corps trying to refocus on attracting more industry and businesses here, partly because some of the industrial construction in the region, the battery plant that's going in southeast of here, and how much flow down there'll be with that in terms of support businesses and et cetera, et cetera. But I'm thinking that there is activity trying to ramp up bringing in industry.
Okay.
And in reality, as we're demonstrating here, you can change this code without a whole heck of a lot of, tremendous work. That this is an intermediate, perhaps as an intermediate step. You do this, and you see how it plays out. And if 3 to 5 years from now, absolutely nobody wants to put in residential upstairs of an industrial space, well, it means that, well, no one really wants to do that. There's no point in setting up more. But all of a sudden, if there's a flood of this, and people are going, well, why can't I build on the ground floor? Why can't I build? And you get a groundswell for that. Well, then you bring it up again.
Okay.
Okay. Are we ready for a motion?
Yeah, so, yeah,
So I, just thinking about what you said, I understand that, and also the second floor piece is a little because this is all speculatory. This is not actually happening, but the second floor piece is a little problematic for me just because of the ambulatory issues,
Sure.
and you're preventing people from, maybe future housing opportunities, and so.
Think about taking it out?
So just the ground and, so period. I
Yeah,
think that.
anywhere.
Yeah.
So the recommendation that I was hearing
Yeah.
was only for I-1 and I-2, dwelling units in buildings with non-residential uses, period.
Yeah.
And then we'll need to tweak section 1262-080 for, I really don't want to have to try to, the text amendment for this would be, I really kind of want to be able to keep that.
Keep which?
Number 4 is dwelling units on upper floors with non-residential at street level. By tweaking that, what would be a couple of the requirements for that we need to consider?
You'd need to, you're saying it, you wanted to add the conditions?
Would we just want to say the non-residential uses, including storage, shall not be located on the same floor as a dwelling unit? Just leave that and take out the other part?
I just can't see what kind of industry you'd have where it would be easier to locate on the second floor. I just can't see it.
Yeah.
But and I'm just throwing it out here because I went to a really good planning conference a long time ago, but when you put residential above industrial in an industrial district, it has a bad effect on the ability for people to human traffic. It makes it a lot easier because it's not a normal neighborhood with eyes on it at all times, and so you can swing people in and out of there without eyes on it. It came up at the planning conference as this is not a good idea for this reason. So if there were a condition that could be attached that were somehow a mitigating factor, great.
Yeah.
I mean, not that you have to figure that out right now, but I always remembered that comment because
So we are sort of divided that some of us think it ought to be on the ground floor as well as the upper floor. And then some of us think it should only be on the upper floor. Is that correct?
That's what I'm
Okay.
hearing, yeah.
Which means either we like it as written or we amend it. Yeah.
And do we amend it as it, I guess I'm not sure what you mean. Do we leave it just the way it is where you can't have housing, or are we amending it the way that it has been proposed?
Well, what I meant is we accept the proposal as written or we amend the proposal.
Okay.
That's what I meant.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, all right, so I'll make a motion to do it with the changed version here where we say dwelling units on, the buildings with non-residential uses. So we just take out the upper floors and the street level thing, and if somebody wants to second that, and we'll
So
actually.
you're proposing that you're proposing that we amend the proposal.
Yes.
Okay.
That's right. So I'm making that motion.
I'll second that.
Okay.
So we're removing upper floors and we're removing at street level.
Yeah, so it could be, you could have residential in the industrial, I-1 and I-2, or,
And it's conditional, though.
and it's conditional, yes. Absolutely.
Okay, Judy, do you want to?
is there any discussion?
This is to whether we accept the change to the proposal.
Yes, it's been moved and seconded.
That's what we're,
Yep.
Any other?
This is a motion to recommend amendment of 1252
Yeah.
to council. And the change will be that dwelling units of buildings with non-residential uses will be allowed as a conditional use.
Yes.
But, and I don't know if you're talking about the same thing, but the way that we've done it previously is, there's first a motion to amend the text amendment.
Yeah, right, right.
And then that's moved, seconded, and voted on. And then you vote on, okay, now
Yes.
we're voting on this new thing.
Right, there's two stages
Okay.
here.
All right, so we're doing the, we're,
And can we do it all at the same meeting?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Okay, then are we ready to vote on this? Okay.
Okay, so voting on the motion to amend the amendment, Zaremski,
No.
Osterholm,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Green,
yes.
Stiles.
No.
Okay.
Okay, now we need a motion, what, to accept this?
Change.
The revised
Yes.
amendment.
Okay.
Dwelling units in buildings with non-residential uses.
Would someone like to make that motion?
Yeah, I'll make the motion.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded.
Carmen. All right, so voting on the amended text amendment, Osterholm,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Green,
Yes.
Zaremski.
I'd like to pass because I'm debating it in my mind.
Okay.
So is that a pass or an abstain or a
Abstain. Abstain.
abstain?
Stiles?
Yes.
All right. Is
Okay.
one abstain.
So now we are on to amend Chapter 1258, Schedule of District Uses.
And the schedule of district uses on, let's see, flip over to, I should have numbered this, I'm sorry, I usually do. 1, 2, 3, the fourth page has the dwellings, units, attached, single-family, multiple family dwellings, and and two-family dwellings as a conditional use in RA, and dwelling units on the upper floors of buildings with non-residential uses at street level is a permitted use in B1 and B2, but now we're going to have to change and make a new category of dwelling units in buildings with non-residential uses as conditional. I'll have to insert an I1, I2 wording for that, okay? Does that make sense to everybody?
So we're inserting I1 and
She's going to create a new,
I'll have to create a new column, or a new row, and that new row will say dwelling units in buildings with non-residential uses for I1 and I2 as conditional.
Okay.
I was drawing at the time, I'm so sorry. Could you perhaps
Okay, so,
repeat that?
so it's adding as a conditional use dwelling, single-family attached, multifamily, and two-family in RA. It's adding as a permitted use dwelling units on the upper floors with non-residential uses on the ground floor in B1 and B2. And then we're adding a new row that'll say dwelling units in buildings with non-residential uses as a conditional use in I1 and I2.
Any discussion?
So this is basically just a sort of a recapitulation of these other,
Correct, and that's why I didn't bring it to you last time until we get through all these others.
got it.
So I'm not taking it.
So this is
yeah,
like sort of a summary.
of every, yeah, of
Got
what
all the uses get caught in the use table.
yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. And we need to have a public hearing, so I'll open the public hearing. Anybody have any comments?
I know.
Oh, are we passing
Laura Curliss, village resident. I live in the RA district, and I ask you to reject the amending of ordinance 1258 and to revisit your passage last month to amend ordinance 1248 regarding the RA zone. The ordinance changes taken together for RA amount to spot zoning. The proposed lot-by-lot conditional use of multifamily in an RA zone is classic spot zoning and is illegal under Ohio law and under Village Ordinance 1280.02B5. What you really want to do is rezone RA. You need to go through the rezoning process for that, also laid out in our ordinance. Does the comprehensive master land use plan of the village support such a change? The village has areas designated for multifamily use and for PUDs are possible. This change seems to circumvent both the comprehensive land use plan planning process and the rezoning amendment process. Regarding public input, the village should have a robust process. That is the rezoning process. Let's be clear. This proposal is not a groundswell. It's not coming from RA owners. It is being done to RA owners. Currently, multifamily is not a permitted use in RA. We have zones for that. Will there be appropriate cross-references to the standards for multifamily if this does happen? Or does the proposed action establish different standards, presumably more stringent? Regarding density and increasing lot coverage and impervious surfaces, has the village studied whether and how such a change is advisable in the current areas that are zoned RA, particularly regarding the handling of stormwater runoff? Let's be clear, even Matt Kirk and I agree about this on Facebook. This is not about affordability. In Yellow Springs, even modest houses are fetching more than $250,000. I personally was shocked what I saw on Zillow. I've given you a printout. Increasing lot density does not create affordability. Only subsidies can do that, or, as I have advocated many times, a public-private effort to build a good quality apartment complex here that will serve many people, young families, elders who want to get out of their big houses and so forth, and pay rent, a good rent in a good quality apartment building. To the extent that the amendments to ordinances 1248 and 1258 devalue existing housing in the RA zone, it could be considered a taking under the U.S. and Ohio constitutions, especially if the rezoning process is not followed. Thank you very much.
Hold. I have a question, Laura. When you say spot zoning, what is it what does that mean?
You have a different use in a zone that is not, so RA is for single family. Single family residential buildings, detached. That's what it says in the ordinance. That's what the comprehensive plan says. So you can't change. It's like you could say it's similar to having another use like industrial. We're going to allow industrial as a conditional use in RA. That's a spot. You're allowing spots. I'm not even 100% sure about this, the change you just did with industrial. But
really quickly,
you're going to allow spot by spot, lot by lot. You're going to put spots in the middle of that RA zone.
so if it was changed, if it was, say it was just permitted, that seems like that would be spot zoning.
That's
having,
rezone.
okay, so, but spot zoning is if that conditional use piece is in there, or period?
No, I believe it's still, if it's in there.
Okay.
And Susan has said, we never met a conditional use we didn't like.
Right.
So it's not like it's going to get a lot of, yeah, you give people public hearing. Yes, you occasionally make really meaningful changes in the proposal. But I've never seen one turned down. Mm-hmm. Anyway, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other public comments?
So these changes are in line with your comprehensive land use plan, which reads in part that the village will quote, review development codes to determine if the goals of promoting infill and affordable housing are impeded by regulation that increase the cost of development, unquote, and, quote, amend zoning regulations to actively support missing middle housing types to encourage housing diversity. There obviously is strong support for these changes that you're making. During the Ober debate, which was quite divisive, both sides were extremely clear that they did want to see more multifamily housing, more apartments specifically, was basically the main message, honestly. And former council member Lisa Krieger specifically voted against the Ober proposal, and the reason that she gave was that it didn't include apartments. Obviously, somebody that was in favor of the proposal, was in favor of the Ober proposal, also wants to see more apartments. This is something that most people in Yellow Springs agree on. This isn't spot zoning. It's kind of hilarious that, okay, should stay respectful. Spot zoning is when you rezone just specific locations for no particular reason. Basically, the reason that zoning codes are not regulatory takings is because they apply evenly to entire areas. And the idea is that even though those restrictions will generally reduce the value of the land, that there's a reciprocity of advantage because theoretically the owners are benefiting from the restrictions on the other people. But what you're doing now is essentially just aligning more closely the residential uses across the village. I can imagine sort of no change more dissimilar, like less discriminating than a government action that aligns the residential use rights in all residential districts. You're not completely doing that, but you're bringing it certainly closer together. If anything, what you're doing is ameliorating an existing uneven distribution of public burdens and benefits. And the fact that the current code is discriminatory is well accepted. Village Manager Sal Marone has publicly described the current zoning code as government redlining.
Who said that?
That was you. Government, quote unquote, redlining. Yes. That was during the Ober debate. You used the term redlining. I definitely stuck in my head. I was like, oh man, gonna have to cite that in the future.
Got receipts.
But in any case, basically everything that Laura said about the law is completely out of line with all Supreme Court precedent. There would be no nexus of causation with which a plaintiff could even bring in the village. They probably couldn't show an injury. Even if they got past that, all of the Penn factors that are used to test regulatory takings would completely fail in this case because there would be no economic impact. The government interference would be extremely weak. The government interference is being compared to eminent domain seizing. All right, bye. That's it. I'll be sending it to council. You guys don't need to know all these legal details. Just feel calm and feel great in what you're doing.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said. You speak.
The legal details.
I think that
Okay. I didn't.
it's safe to assume that this body will be well advised by the solicitor.
Thank you.
So that it's all right if you don't explain everything to them.
Okay, then, at this point, I'm going to close the public hearing. Okay, now discussion. And I wanted to ask Amy, do you have any comments on this issue of spot zoning?
I can read you the Ohio Supreme Court's definition of spot zoning.
Okay.
So this is really this is different than what we were talking about.
Yeah.
Do we want
Well-
to finish up this?
I think that it is all part and parcel of what we're talking about, because with the table of uses,
Okay.
all the changes that
Yeah.
we've talked about for the last two meetings are kind of incorporated into this one table. So, with the exception of like the annexation change. So, I do think it's all part of it. I do not, allowing this as a conditional use is not spot zoning. The Ohio Supreme Court has defined spot zoning as the singling out of one lot or a small area for differential or discriminatory treatment from surrounding land which is similar in character. So spot zoning is when you've got an area Generally, most of these cases arise out of a residential area. Somebody wants to put a business or an industrial use, and the government wants that business or industrial use, so they rezone that one parcel to allow for that use. That can be challenged as illegal spot zoning. And the courts are pretty specific that it needs to be a small parcel, a limited area that's rezoned for it to be considered that. Conditional uses are allowed across the village in all of our zoning districts, right? And so conditional uses and permitted use, but we have, our zoning code is a permissive code, right? So what's allowed is allowed, and what isn't. So in every district, you can have permitted uses and conditional uses. And those conditional uses, if allowed on a parcel, someone comes in and says, I want to have a tattoo parlor here, and they apply for a conditional use for their tattoo parlor, that would not be spot zoning. That's just a conditional use. The other issue I wanted to bring up that came up, Carmen, you were hit on this a little bit, was that whether Planning Commission and then Council makes these text amendments to allow for example, multifamily and single in an RA district as permitted or conditional, doesn't change that analysis. It's still, you're tweaking the text of the code. Look at John shaking his head like he agrees with me. I love it. So, yeah, you're tweaking the code to allow for the use, either as a permitted or conditional. You're not doing a rezoning. Rezoning is a very specific term of art. You rezone all the time. Most recently to PUD. You've done rezonings to PUD for different properties, but you might take a swath of land. Someone comes to you and says, hey, this is zoned whatever RA, and I'd like for it to be RB, and then you apply your standards, listen to your staff report, do all that, and rezone the land. That is rezoning. What you're doing right now is a text amendment to totally different analysis.
Basically allowing uses that weren't allowed.
Yeah, we're just changing what uses are allowed in the district.
What would the rezoning, why would we or wouldn't we want to rezone to achieve the changes that we're looking for?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So why wouldn't you want to just wholesale across the board take the RA district and rezone it all to RB, for example?
Is that what you're,
Well-
basically that's what you feel like we're doing?
That's the result you want, and, yeah, and you get the public input in a rezoning process. You get to hear, you have not heard.
Well, I can definitely answer that question.
Except for me.
And the reason that you would not want to do that is the same reason that you're contemplating these uses as conditional in
Right.
RA
Right.
because of your infrastructure issues. If you just rezone to RB, you assume that the infrastructure will be able to accommodate any RB uses, which we've been told it cannot in many cases.
Right.
As
And
well
this-
as,
And the standards that you would apply as a commission are different for the analysis of the rezoning versus allowing a conditional use.
and it's also the whole thing of none of that would be conditional. If you rezone to RB or RC, it's just all permitted. By keeping it this way and allowing it as conditional use, anytime somebody wants to put in a duplex or multi-unit, it comes here and you have the option for citizen input on it, okay? As opposed to it's allowed across the board.
And to repeat what Judy said, any infrastructure issues or utilities issues
Yeah.
can be vetted and discussed and addressed on the front end.
So if somebody wanted to put in a duplex on an RA lot, this would be a conditional use, we could deny that request if we didn't think that the infrastructure was adequate?
Absolutely. Yeah, so your conditional use standards are, I shouldn't give you it'd be based on the facts of the case before you. But yes, it's the Planning Commission's purview to deny conditional uses. It doesn't happen a lot, as we've said. But it would be, that's where, let me flip to the other section of the code real quick. But your standards for conditional uses are very different than the standards that you would apply, for example, what you're doing now with the text amendment, right? So when you're looking at a conditional use, you're going to be looking at whether it's compatible with character, whether the area is served by the right public facilities and services. It references drainage, water, sewers, all of those types of things. So all of that is, yes, within your consideration when you're hearing an application for a conditional use.
Are we allowed to consider the impact on the neighboring properties? What if it's
Yes.
going to make their properties less desirable?
Well, that's one
Well,
of the comments, one of those.
Less desirable is, what you're really looking at, the language of your code is whether it's compatible with the character of the general vicinity. So, for example, if you had someone applying for a conditional use to put a multifamily building on a single-family lot, and you had all the neighbors come in here and say to you, we have nowhere to park, or our basements are backing up as it is, or whatever the issue might be, then you'd be able to hear that, apply your standards, and make the determination. You'd be, then you're in that, you're in like a quasi-judicial role at that point, weighing the evidence in front of you to make the determination as to whether it should be granted.
But the economic impact on the neighbors is not something we can consider.
Economic impact on the neighbors.
If your house would be worth less because somebody wants to build a big, all the way to the setbacks structure on there.
But that's subjective. on whether
That's
it
going to
has-
be, you're going to really be under this idea of compatible with the character of the general vicinity.
Okay. All right.
Is really what you're going to be looking at. And, it's one of those, each conditional use that you hear is its own box of evidence. Everything has to be based on that exact fact pattern, right, and not anybody else's fact pattern. So one might be appropriate in one area, but not appropriate in another. So you're not locked. If you grant a conditional use for a duplex, for example, in RA, you are not then committed to grant the next one, because the factors in that case, the evidence in front of you will be different.
Okay, are there other comments that people have, questions? Okay, then I'm going to move approval to amend Chapter 1258, the Schedule of District Uses, as outlined by Denise.
So are we going to start by voting on the amendment?
Yeah.
To add the line for I-1 and
That's what we did
I-2.
last time.
Okay, so we're voting to amend the amendment to add, inserting the I-1 and I-2.
Inserting a row of, that simply states dwelling units in buildings with non-residential uses in I-1 and I-2 as conditional.
Yes.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
On-res uses. Green,
Yes.
Zaremski,
Yes.
Osterholm,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Stiles.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, now we need we need a motion to approve,
Yes, to send the recommendation to council.
to send the recommendation. Okay, I move that we approve the amendment to send to council.
Osterholm, Stiles, Osterholm,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Green,
Yes.
Zaremski,
Yes.
Stiles.
Yes. Okay, our next one is to amend Chapter 1284.02, definitions A through B, add the definition for aid to construction.
Yes, so aid to construction, we just thought it would be a good idea. Oftentimes, there's a lot of gray areas in the zoning code, and so it helps if you have definitions, so you kind of have an idea of what a group was thinking about when they added that to the code. And so one of the things that's come up is aid to construction. It is more and more something that we're paying attention to when development is happening. And so we thought just a simple definition, just saying that it's an amount of money paid to the municipality by the developer or property owner for required infrastructure improvements.
Okay, so it's just that one.
Yeah, yep,
That we're adding.
that's it.
And the required is, so required by the, it would be like in this case, required by the village? Or is that, or just required by the project?
Both.
Oh,
It can be
okay.
both by the project itself, it can be what the requirement is for the village standards, it just depends.
Okay.
Yeah.
Other questions for Denise? Okay, if not, then we will open the public hearing. Any comments? If not, I'm going to close the public hearing. Would someone like to make the motion?
I'll make a motion to add the aid to construction to the 1284.02 definitions.
Second.
Great.
Brown,
Yes.
Zaremski,
Yes.
Osterholm,
Yes.
Green,
Yes.
Stiles.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Our last one is to amend Chapter 1284.03, definitions, T through U, adding the definition for utilities review.
So that was something that we added to the zoning code previously, but it wasn't added to the definitions. And we did that because of the infill development that was going on. This Public Works Department really wants to be able to do a utilities review. And so as it reads, the definition is, prior to approval of a minor subdivision, replat, or the building of a structure, a utilities review is required. The Public Works Department will determine if improvements to electric, water, sewer, and/or stormwater systems are needed. Improvements are at the expense of the developer or property owner. The relocation or upgrade will need to be complete prior to a designated village official signing the survey for a minor subdivision or replat, or the issuance of a zoning permit for construction on the property. So it gives you an either-or.
So any kind of building of a structure?
Yeah, Johnny now, if we do a single-family dwelling, he checks it first.
I want to build a shed,
No, sheds are different.
not structures?
Well, it's a structure.
They don't
but
have utilities.
It doesn't have, it doesn't have utilities.
And how about an accessory dwelling?
Yes, he'd want to look at that, because, again, if it's a dwelling, if there's a power line going over where they're wanting to put that ADU, then that's a no. They have to move that power line, because it won't pass code. I think we now put that into the code as well. It has to be 7.5 feet away from any power line. So those are things he looks at. They're going to look at, if they're not sure about the sewer or water, they may tell the property owner that they're going to need to camera it and find out, where this location is in order to be able to tap in, things like that. So the village doesn't end up getting stuck with it later.
Is this typical for other municipalities? Do we know?
Is it?
All right.
Other questions, comments? Okay, we will open the public hearing. Does anybody want to make any comments? Okay, we'll close the public hearing.
I do want to say one more comment about that. So let me give you an example. If somebody wants to do a minor subdivision, and it does require, it's an uncommon lot, and it has to go to Planning Commission, and you guys can still go ahead and approve it. What will happen at that point is I may not sign that survey until Johnny signs off that they've taken care of those improvements, or if that survey needs to be done and needs to be filed, then we may go, the flexibility would be, you're not going to get the zoning permit until we know that the construction's been done. Does that make sense? Yeah. So I just want to
And
clarify
the
that.
utilities review is done by the village.
It's done by Public Works, yeah.
Okay, would someone like to make the motion?
I'll make the motion to accept the utilities review.
I'll second.
Green,
Yes.
Osterholm,
Yes.
Zaremski,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Stiles.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, that's all that we have on this. May I bring up something else?
Sure. I
As a
mean,
potential-
it's new business or?
Text amendment?
Oh, well, no,
No?
but for the next meeting.
For the next meeting, okay.
Because you need to
Okay.
notice it.
Then what I wanted to bring up is that Gavin brought this up at a meeting of inclusionary housing, having something about that. And I thought about that. At the time I said I thought that needed to come from council. And I think we ought to consider sending something to council, because we are wanting to increase affordable housing. And so what my experience is in housing for quite some time with affordable housing is that it doesn't happen by magic. It happens because builders are forced, usually, or you have something that makes it so that they want to build affordable housing. They will partner with a nonprofit because it usually takes a subsidy to do to make affordable housing. And when I talk about affordable housing, I'm talking about housing for low income and moderate income. So that's 50% of the area medium income and 80% of the area medium income as defined by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. And so I would like us to think about that because I think that our window is closing if we really want to get some affordable housing, that there aren't many projects coming up or land for projects or even land for zoning to be annexed into the town. And I think it would be wonderful if we were able to say, and what I was looking at, and I've sort of done some research, but maybe our attorney, I know Ellis Jacobs has done a lot of research about this, but I was thinking of 15%, 5% for low income and 10% for moderate income. Any response?
So you're saying, when you say inclusionary housing, what you're saying is that we would want to have a requirement that these would be the kind of ratios for, if you put in new houses, so the thing that they're doing, the Kinney Farm would have to, if we were redoing it under this, they would have to have a certain amount of moderate and low-income housing somehow provided in that.
Yes, and usually you have a number, like any more than 7 or 7 units and above that you would have, then 15% would be affordable.
It's an interesting idea, but I'm wondering how you do that. I mean, based on the zoning as exists, it sounds like, I hate to say it, it's almost like, I think someone was mentioning there's some community that any development in it needs to be a PUD in order to have more control over bits and pieces like that. That's almost what it sounds like.
At a future meeting, correct? Something to think about?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm having no objection to that.
I'd like to see how if there are, other examples of how municipalities have done this.
Okay. I've read about a number and usually they're on the West Coast. There may be ones, and I can ask Ellis because he's done a lot of research on it.
It'd be interesting to see, because I'm often seeing comparisons of some, very progressive housing activity, and it's always in places. And so I'm just curious if there are any examples of creative approaches like that in small communities, because just because Portland or LA implements something, it doesn't always translate well to a little village this size. So
I agree with you.
Yeah.
My concern is that this little village that we have been hoping that we would have affordable housing, and we're passing some things that we hope that will make a difference. Well, as all of us have said, the way you're going to get affordable housing is through a subsidy. And how do we make that happen? We haven't been successful. Home Inc. has done it, but we've not been successful in doing it in a larger way. And so I'm wanting us to think about doing it in a larger way.
That's where, like I said, it's worth talking about.
Amy, are you
Put it on there.
aware of any communities?
What keeps going through my mind, I mean, I'm not opposed to the idea, but I've heard a lot of criticism from the zoning group that just conditional uses are stopping developers from coming into town and developing here. That's the mantra I've heard over and over, right? Conditional uses keep us from building buildings. And this is even more intense. So I just want you all to think about that.
Yeah, I just want to see some more information. I mean, I'm neither here nor there as far as any decision on it.
Yeah.
So while we're talking about sort of things for the future, what about, how would we go about getting an apartment building? I mean, what's...
Besides just raising a bunch of money.
You need a builder, you need a developer.
Okay, come on up and talk. What's literally step one? What's the first step in
Oh,
this?
good.
So
Josue,
did anybody
Josue's going to
watch-
tell us
did
how to do it.
anybody- Did anybody watch or follow our housing
Right?
stuff?
I know.
Like, did anybody watch
what he's
or
gonna
follow
recap,
our
I think.
Yeah, please, Josue.
There are multiple ways, but I'd like to take a step back and say that the Housing Advisory Board has reconvened. Carmen is part of that group,
Oh.
and we had our first meeting last week.
Oh.
And we outlined a few things that we're going to address throughout the year to create a strategy to bring about more housing in the village, and the right type of housing, not just any housing, but what are going to be the priorities for the village in terms of unit mixes, what type of price points we want to meet. So we're re-engaging in those conversations to bring to council some proposals. To get to your question, Stephen, how do you get an apartment building? Susan having done the work, this type of work in our area for many years, she knows very well how the process goes, that you either need a very willing developer, you need very willing finance arm to be willing to put up the money and offer subsidies, and you need a willing community to bring about those units in a community. So you need all these three pieces working together to bring the right type of development to a community. I think there are some advantages in our community, there are some disadvantages. When you think about incentives, where you're talking about the inclusionary zoning, there are several structures throughout the country, models that we can look at and see what works here. One of them will be property tax abatements or financing incentives to this. Columbus has tried a couple creative things where they created the Affordable Housing Fund. That's probably our closest example. City of Worthington was looking to put a ballot, I think it's maybe on the ballot this November, where it would put a property tax assessment, a property tax levy on the ballot for citizens to vote that would dedicate an amount of funding every year for affordable housing development. Worthington is following the model of Columbus, Ohio. So Worthington's a smaller locality. So those are two examples of what's happening around the financing piece. Around the developer piece, we have a local developer, the Home Inc. I think the village, as an administration, as a council, as a local government, may need to consider its role as a developer to direct and bring about a development that fits the needs of our community. Then the community piece, that third pillar, is, well, what can our community live with? What are they willing to support for development projects? So those will be the three pillars that we need to think about for bringing about an apartment building or a mixed-use development.
So would like offering a developer like a property tax, assuming that, if you did bring in, if you had a fairly good-sized apartment building that had, let's say, 100 units, and you brought in people and they would be paying income tax, is that even possible to say, well, we'll let you have a break on your property tax for some amount of time?
It is possible. There are a few things that the village will need to do to allow for those kinds of things. We will need to implement a CRA. We looked at this 2 years ago. What we would need to do a community reinvestment area. We could look at creating special incentive districts that will offset property taxes or use future property tax payments as a funding source for development of a project. So there are those incentives. So anytime you think about an inclusionary zoning ordinance, you have to think about where are the incentives and aligning those incentives to meet your desired outcome.
So can I make a suggestion? I think that someone else from the Planning Commission should be in the housing committee. Should be on the housing committee. Because Carmen may or may not be here.
Right.
Here. And you need that flow of information.
I'll be on the
I would like to
housing
be on there
committee.
too.
I mean, that seems
If we
completely
have-
appropriate to the whole,
What would be the limitations? I hear of Stephen and Susan. That would mean we have three.
Do you meet usually during the day?
We're meeting during the days, but Carmen, we're probably open to changing meeting the schedule. How many can we have, Judy?
one.
One more.
Well, okay, Susan, I'll let you, you do it. It's okay, it's easier for you to meet during the day.
Okay.
That's fine.
Right, and actually, what you've been talking about sounds like it's a real fit for this committee as opposed to us independently talking about it.
All right.
Is that, I mean, Josue is the arbiter of that committee, so that, I mean, that's kind of your call.
Yes, Susan, I hear there's a nomination for you to join our committee, and I accept your nomination.
You've been volunteers.
All right.
All right.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing that with us. Do we have anything, any other old business, new business?
No, no. Wanted agenda planning, though.
So agenda planning.
Yes, I'm expecting 2 property owners, Bushco and the Lumber Market Eatery, to come to submit a preliminary PUD application by the 18th this month. We're going to try to get very far along before I'm gone. The preliminary, or the PUD designation for all of that area. We already got Millworks, and now if we get Bushco and the Lumber Market Eatery with those additional uses that you often see in B1, B2, it'll bring more flexibility, and it does meet the comp plan goal from 2010 and 2020 to expand to the north. So I'm expecting that at the next meeting.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do we have any idea when the new development, when that may come?
Yes, so they have resubmitted to me a final phase 1. And so what's happening is they're basically, there's nothing in the code that says once they turn that final phase to me, as far as scheduling it, they can wait. So that's what's happened. They've submitted it by the April deadline that was required, but they're not scheduling it with Planning Commission right now, because what they're going to do is they're going to go ahead and put in the infrastructure. They don't want to have to do the performance bond and development fees and stuff like that. They're just going to go ahead and put the infrastructure in, and when they get that pretty far along, then they're going to schedule the second. You guys did a final once, but now they're doing it in 2 phases. So you're going to come back and for a second final.
Okay.
And then it'll go to council after that. Makes sense.
Okay.
So that, you probably won't see that till the fall.
Okay. And you probably won't be with us.
And I won't be
Unless
here.
you want to come back. Okay, if there is not anything else, then I move we adjourn.
I'll second that.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you.